everyone, so what you just heard on the track earlier was the Ceriatone Son of Yeti. Now the Son of Yeti is basically a hot-rodded Plexi. However, the controls on this amp really allows you to fine tweak that beautiful, juicy, crunchy Plexi tone that we all know and love. Now it's a very straightforward amp. It's a single channel amp. There is no reverb built in, however there is an effects loop so you can put your favorite reverb or delay pedals in there. No foot switches, nothing of that sort. Now let's get into how the controls on this amp work. Now there's your basic gain 1, gain 2, master knob, a treble, middle, bass, presence and deep knobs, and at the back there is something called a pussy trim. Yes, a pussy trim. We'll get to that in a bit. Now for each of the gain knob and the master level knob, there is a 3-way toggle switch for each. So for the gain knobs, when the toggle switch is set in the middle, it gives a more neutral tone. When set to the left, it gives you more presence and more gain. When set to the right, it just gives you more presence to your overall tone. And the 3-way toggle switch above the master level knob gives you 3 different voicings, a 60s, 70s, 80s kind of voicings. We'll go through the tones on that a bit. So first, let's just listen to the main 3-band EQ on the amp, which is the treble, middle and bass knobs. Now besides those 3 bands, there is also a presence and a deep knob. Now a presence knob is pretty common, it just fine tweaks your higher frequencies. The deep knob is kind of like the presence but for the low end. Now you heard that, let's compare the presence knob and the treble knob and the deep knob and the bass knob with each other so you know what kind of frequencies each of these knobs are actually affecting. So there you go, you can hear the subtle differences that the presence and the deep knob does. So if you don't like so much of a boomy sounding tone, you can back off the bass, but sometimes backing up the bass might remove the body from your overall tone, so you can kind of recover that body by using the deep knob. And vice versa for your higher end, when you put too much treble it can be quite shrill, so you back that off and use the presence to subtly bring up certain higher frequencies that are more pleasant to the ears. Now let's get into the main action on the front here, the gain 1 and gain 2 knobs. Now again, just like the EQ section, you had the main weight of the EQ, which is the bass, middle and treble, and you had the fine tweaking, which is the deep and the presence knob. Now I'd say the same thing with both gain 1 and gain 2, with the gain 2 knob being the overall gain level of the amp and gain 1 being the more subtle control where it affects the flavor of the distortion. Now let's give the gain 2 section a listen. And as I switch the toggle switch between the bright and bright plus gain, I want you to hear how much the toggle switches affect the overall tone. Now you heard that, let's hear the same thing with the gain 1 knob. Now you can hear that the gain 1 knob is something that really alters the character of the overall distortion. So if you were to put it in lower setting, you get a much more tighter sounding plexi tone, but the more you increase it, you get a much more fuzzier tone. Like if you put it really high, you can hear the thump, like if you're using some sort of traditional fuzz pedal in front of your amp. Then again, if you need more brightness overall, you can just switch both the toggle switches to the bright side, or if you need more gain and brightness, you can switch both the way to the left. What's really nice about that is you can really accommodate the amp to any sort of cabinet or guitar setup. If you're having a much darker sounding cab, you can switch those toggle switches to the more brighter settings. If you have a much more brighter sounding setup overall, you can just leave it in the middle. If you're lacking gain and brightness, just flick it to the left and you got yourself covered. So again, to recap, gain 1 is what changes the character of the distortion, and gain 2 sets the overall gain level of the entire tone. Now if we get to the toggle switch above the master volume, the way I like to describe this toggle switch is something that sets the overall saturation level of the distortion. So if you had it in the middle, it'll be a much more cleaner sounding distortion. You can hear the clarity of the strings a bit more. If you flick it to the left, it's where the saturation level is at its max. So if you want full on distortion without any clarity, you just want all the gain and sludge around your strings, then you want to flick it to the left. If you flick it to the right, it's kind of in between those two settings. So you do get much more saturation, but at the same time, you still retain the clarity of your overall tone. At the back of this amp, there is a knob called a pussy trimmer. Now the pussy trimmer literally sets how hairy your tone gets. At a higher setting, you can really hear the hair around your strings. There's no other way I can describe it. You just gotta hear it and then you would understand. So let's give that a listen. Now the effect of the pussy trimmer knob is very subtle, but it's a great addition to the amp because most Plexi amps tend to get pretty hairy, and that would suit high gain just fine. But for instance, if you want to back off the gain and play with a much more cleaner tone, the hairiness of the tone might bug some people. You can literally feel or hear the hair. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. If you play the Plexi, you would understand. So if you're playing with a much more lower gain sound on the amp, you can reduce the pussy trimmer so it doesn't feel too hairy. So when you play chords, when you pluck chords and things like that, it sounds a bit more clear. It doesn't get too hairy. Yeah. So that is the amp, the son of Yeti, a really badass sounding hot-rodded Plexi. So again, recapping the controls, you have your meat and potato section and the subtle section, and the meat and potatoes being the bass, middle, treble, and gain 2, and the more subtle section, which is the presence, the deep, and the gain 1 knob, and also the 3 toggle switches. Again, if you need more clarity, you leave the toggle switch on the master volume in the middle. If you need lots of saturation, put it on the left. If you want things to be kind of in between, you flick it to the right. And again, with toggle switches on the gain 1 and gain 2, it just provides you a much more control over your setup. So be it you're plugging in with a Strat, Les Paul, Ibanez, single coils, humbuckers, P90s, 4x12s, 2x12s, 1x12s, 1x8s, you are able to really fine tweak the tone of the amp to suit whatever setup you have. So let's end this video by listening to a few tones. If you like the video, give us a like, subscribe for more content, and see you real soon.